Welcome to Crafting Your Next Move.
Welcome to Crafting Your Next Move with Lori Kraft, Associate Broker with the Kraft team at Origin Realty Group. Lori is a top producing Houston realtor with more than 15 years of experience helping clients buy and sell homes across the greater Houston area. Known for her honest advice and boutique approach, she and her team combine cutting-edge marketing with good old-fashioned service to deliver results that speak for themselves. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're talking about how property taxes and appraisal district values affect their sale. Lori will walk us through what those numbers really mean and what they don't. Hello, Lori.
Hey, how are you?
Wonderful. So, Lori, sellers often start with their county appraisal value when thinking about what their home is worth. How do you usually help them understand the difference between that number and true market value?
I ask them usually, because usually it's lower, if this is what they really believe their house is worth. But the reality is you have to sit down with them and explain how the whole appraisal district idea works. A lot of them are unaware that most of the people that are out there doing the work to appraise their home are not actually licensed appraisers. All we have to have is one per district, right? So you've got one guy that's an appraiser and everybody works for him and answers to him. And they don't measure correctly because a lot of times they'll measure it from the sky with the drone and they just draw around the edge, and that some of it's porch, some of it is attic. They make mistakes all the time. But the biggest factor is that people will fight their taxes every year if they're smart. Otherwise, the district is going to raise their taxes 10% every year. The ones that are usually overpriced are newer. The ones that are usually undervalued are the ones that are older because they've been on it. And even if you appraise it 10% every year, you have to remember in 21 to 22-ish, we saw almost a 30% jump in value. Now, the taxing authority couldn't reflect that, which is why they keep charging us 10% because they want to catch up, right? But you need to know what actual solds are. And that's where we have to just try to explain, do you want your house to be worth this much? Or do you want this house to be worth that much? And sometimes it's very painful when you have to show a seller you've been overpaying on your taxes. And it's very painful too. They don't want you to get an appraiser measure because that original measurement was done when the house was built. And builders measure from outside stud to outside stud. And we all know that in between the stud and your sheetrock, there's a whole lot of stuff. So you can lose inches on every wall, and in larger houses, that can equate to several hundred feet. So you've been taxed on a 3,500 square foot home, but when you actually measure livable square footage, you may only have a 3,200 square foot home. And that's very upsetting when you have to explain to sellers. But you want that up front, so then you're not under contract, and now you're fighting because it didn't appraise, because it was under a square footage of what you did not produce.
Well, as you mentioned, appraisal districts across Houston area adjust values every year. What tends to matter the most for sellers when they're reviewing those notices before listing?
That's kind of a complicated question in and of itself, because there's really nothing that they're going to look at in terms of that appraisal that will impact their sale, or shouldn't. What you're looking at is raw numbers. That's all the appraisal district's looking at too. How big is your house? That's that square footage I talked to you about. If you have very different square footage measurements, like when I do it, I look at several places. And if they don't agree, if you have one, I had one recently that I sold that the appraisal district had them at 3,100 square feet. And they were like, shh, don't say anything. We know we added a room. Don't say anything. And then when we did the measurement, because Realist had caught up to it, which is different. And then you have RPR, which is a whole different measurement. And HCAT had a different measurement. So everybody was off by a little bit. Well, as it turns out, they were 600 square feet larger than what everybody had. And that made a huge difference in the price of their home. Now, that client was aware of it. Another client might not be. So if I'm looking at their appraised value and I'm looking at what the appraisal district has, and I'm walking a property, and oftentimes it's in neighborhoods where you have very similar floor plans, and I can say, I know this is bigger. This has an extra bedroom. That other floor, the floor plan that you started with is not the floor plan that this is. And you didn't build it, the guy before you, or two buyers before you built it. So you may not have ever known that. So yeah, you got a benefit because the taxing authority didn't know it. They based it on what the builder told them. So a couple of years of benefit. So you cannot always rely on those appraisal district measurements nor their numbers. But that's really what we're looking at. And there's not a lot the seller can do there aside from we have a pool now. They don't have that. We've got bigger square footage or we have less square footage. Those kinds of things, just raw numbers.
Well, some owners will see a big increase on their property tax statement and assume that the buyers will pay the same amount. How do you guide them through what's transferable and what isn't?
Well, you have to look again, it's about data. It doesn't matter what the appraisal district has decided your house is worth. And what is hard, and you have to be very gentle when you tell people this, but that's on you, man. You should have fought your appraisal. We have lots of means to fight the appraisal. You overvalued the property. And a lot of times people like that on some emotional level because it makes them feel good, like somehow their house is worth all this money. And then you're paying taxes on that. So why would you do that? Doesn't make sense to me. But people do. And then when you go to sell it, you're meeting with someone like me and I'm showing you raw data and I'm saying, these are the houses that sold. This is what they sold for. I have to explain to them that you've got this window. And if you step outside that window, you are actually going to sell below the window because you will sit on market because nobody's going to see your house because they're looking in the window for this house in this neighborhood. And then you lose your best buyer. So what I have to do is come to the table with all the comparables and not just numbers. I don't just come with a spreadsheet that shows this size house sold for this or their favorite is $1 per square. Totally not how we measure houses or how we value houses, but they all like that. So I'll give them that data too. But it's more. You have to show them pictures, which is why we really hate it when agents will take all the pictures down. It messes up the appraisals and it messes up for us when we're trying to help people understand what their house is worth. So you have to be able to look at apples to apples.
Well, taxes can influence how buyers compare neighborhoods, compare price points, and even monthly payments. So, how do you help sellers understand that buyers are looking at their home through that lens?
Oftentimes, my sellers are also purchasing something, right? So I say, put your buyer hat on now. And they'll tell that what they'll tell you is, oh, that's why I'm getting out of here because I don't like the tax district either. And you have to help them understand that all plays a role in what they pay for this house. I actually had one that's not taxes, it's HOA, but it was huge. We had, and it was a downsizer market, right? This was a group of homes that we usually, the big homes are on the other side, and then this little niche neighborhood was smaller homes with patio homes. And they had this huge $4,000 HOA fee every year. And we couldn't figure out what it was for. So what I had to do, because it didn't make sense to me. So what I had to do was explain to my seller, look, you've got all these things going against you, but this is a big factor. Somebody's downsizing, even if they have the cash to buy your house, they're facing this $4,000 bill every year. And we don't have a lot to show for that. So what we did in that case is we offered as a seller assist to pay for the first year of home ownership, an HOA fee. We just said we will give the buyer $4,000 in seller assistance they can use for their closing costs, which will enable them to save that $4,000. You can also do that as a selling tool on taxes. If you know it's going to be an $8,000 tax bill, maybe you say we are willing to offer up to $8,000 in seller assistance to offset your first year of taxes.
Well, we know sometimes there are situations where exemptions lapse or paperwork isn't up to date. What tends to happen when those issues show up during a transaction, and how do you help sellers address them early?
Well, first of all, we look at it. If I'm dealing with a senior, I want to know if you've taken your senior exemption because that is going to be something that's going to show up, right? That tax bill is going to look lower because they have a senior exemption because they're not paying school taxes. So we have to make sure that that paperwork is correct. And there is actually I brag on HAR all the time because I think they're phenomenal at what they do. And there's a little box in HAR that allows you to check senior exemption. So that way, that buyer coming in is aware their taxes are going to be different. And their lender will also be aware that it's not going to be the same. Most of the time, if it's a local lender, they already know that. They can factor it. But if you're talking about, I'm going to out Rocket Mortgage, but Rocket Mortgage or some of these companies that are not in state, they may or may not know that. So that's something that you really want to talk about with your seller.
For homes in the $700,000 to $800,000 range, small tax differences can make a noticeable impact on affordability. How do you approach that conversation so that sellers understand the role that taxes play without assuming that it controls the price?
We go back to affordability, right? And in a previous podcast, I talked about when you're talking about your million plus home, you only have a small sliver, right? Well, I'm going to tell you the 700 and 800 market isn't all that big either. You still only have 2 to 5% of the population can even afford your house. So we set expectations from the get go. We let them know maybe you're in a resort neighborhood. Those come with much higher tax rates. Or maybe you're in one of the best school districts or a new school district. Again, much higher tax rates. So we know that there are things that are going to draw buyers in, but they're also going to give those buyers pause. So maybe it's not going to be the 5%. Maybe it's going to be the 2%, which makes your buyer pool smaller. So your expectation has to be set from the beginning that we're going to have to do some things a little bit differently. We're going to have to do a lot of a big push, maybe even do an open house that you didn't want to do, Mr. Seller. But we're going to have to do things to make sure we get the biggest net to catch those 2% of the buyer pool. But we also need to be prepared to be on the market longer. It's just going to take a while to sell.
You've touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's return to when you're preparing a pricing strategy, what specific market data gives you the most realistic picture or a more realistic picture than the county appraisal ever could?
For sure. Again, I'm bragging on HAR. We live in a privacy state, right? That's part of what Texas does. If you go on Zillow and you say, "What is my house worth?" They're going to give you a range because all they have is tax record, right? So it goes back to are those homes undervalued, overvalued? Where are you in that? And Zillow had said at one point that their range could be 20% off in either direction. You don't want to be 20% off when you price. So HAR actually gives us real-time data. I do not go back farther than 3 months if I can help it. Some neighborhoods only turn 1 or 2 houses a year. And then we do have to go 365 back. Some are in unique niche neighborhoods where I may have to go back 2 years and go outside the neighborhood. But if I can, in most cases you can, you want to stay in that neighborhood, narrow it to that section if you can of that neighborhood. Houston's notorious for master plan communities, so we're able to do that. And then you want to look at sold data. Occasionally I'll pull in a pending, as long as that pending went pending quickly. If it's pending for more than a month, like a month ago, like it was been on market for 30 days or more and then went pending, then that data doesn't matter to me because I don't know how much they had to come down. There's no way to know that. So it doesn't have as much value. If I have one that went pending after 2 days, I guarantee you it's sold for at least list price. So I can include that in my analysis. So I want to be able to show them that. So I use HAR. Realist has gotten RPR, which is Realtor's Price Opinion, basically, has gotten a lot better. Used to be I didn't like them. I felt like data was off, but they have gotten so much better. And they do produce a range, which it's a very small range, but they also give you everywhere they got their information. So then I can look at that and go, I don't like that data, or that data is much more reliable. And that gives me yet another tool to help people understand how we're pricing their property and why. And I will tell you, one of the biggest drivers in pricing is experience. I know these neighborhoods. There's a lot of great agents that really know the neighborhoods. And if it's not a neighborhood you sell a whole lot in, you better have connections. And that's what good realtors do, is we form lots of friendships and connections. So I can call my friend and go, "Hey, Heidi, I haven't sold in this neighborhood in 2 years. What do you think of this property?" I had one that sat and was driving me nuts. And I'm like, what is going on? Why am I not moving? The data says I should be moving it. And so I pulled in two of my good friends that sell in that neighborhood every other day, and they say, here's your problem. And we were able to address it and move that property. So those are the kinds of things that help me and help all agents.
It's all about the network. Absolutely.
It really and truly is.
Can you share a situation where understanding the appraisal district numbers helped a seller make a smart pricing decision or adjust expectations in a productive way?
I think that it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. And I have had the sellers that really struggle with it are your older sellers, to be honest. Because they are of an era, and I say older, not much older than me, but they're of an era where all the facts were the facts, right? And if the government entity says it's true, then it must be true. And that's not always the case, right? It's really not. So what we have to do is when we go in, and I've done this with my older sellers, is I go in and they say, well, the appraisal district says it's worth this. I've had it both sides where he hadn't fought his appraisal in 25 years. They were overvalued and he was overpaying. The home was much smaller than what the appraisal district had it listed at. So that was a really hard one because it hurt his heart, right? Because then he feels like he's a fool, like he's been taken advantage of for all these years. So we have to sort of help them understand it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just this is what it's worth, and we don't want to overprice. The other half is also true. I've actually had sellers tell me, oh, there's no way we're going to get that because the appraisal district said it's worth this. That's ridiculous. Why are we going to sit on market? And so I have to prove my value, show them my history, and that, this is the percentage that have sold less than list. This is the percentage that have sold over list. So you're going to have to trust me, Mr. Seller. I really actually do know how to price a home. And it's going to be more, you're giving your house away at this. You were brilliant because the appraisal district has been taxing you on this. So take further advantage and get the income and the equity out of this house that you have earned by sitting in it and keeping it in good condition.
I love it. Love it. Love it. Well, for somebody who's thinking about listing later this year, as we wrap up here, what's one useful step that they can take now to review their tax documents or appraisal district information so that they are better prepared?
Well, the first thing you're going to look at is square footage. You want to see if that makes sense to you. Look and see if the bedrooms and the bathrooms match because it often does not. I have one listing right now that I was like, I know you at least have one bathroom. And they're like, what? And I said, this shows that it's a 5-bedroom house with no bathrooms. And they're like, oh my gosh, because here's what's going to happen. It auto-populates when you go to load it to MLS, and it'll populate with no bathrooms. So we have to know that so I don't make that error. And usually I go back and check everything to make sure it's right. But that is an error that can happen. So you want to check that. If it feels bigger than it is and get an agent to walk it with you, then you need to have it remeasured. If it feels way smaller than what they're stating, as painful as it is, you're going to need to get it remeasured or you're going to price it wrong. You want to make sure that if there is no pool listed on that appraisal data, which now they have drones, so they kind of figure it out, but they kind of catch you on that. But if you have it not in there, you want to make sure that when your agent is doing their comparables, doing their CMA, they include the pool. You want to make a list of all of the things you've updated since you purchased, because that will play into it too. Appraiser doesn't know that unless you invite them in their house. Never do that, by the way. Never do that. So that's pretty much where we are.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Crafting Your Next Move. If you're thinking about selling in Cypress, Tomball, Memorial Villages, Inner Loop, or anywhere in the greater Houston area, visit craftrealtyteam.com to learn more or connect directly with Lori's team. And remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you'll catch the next episode too. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.